Robert Kopper Show is brought to you by NSK Information Technology in Boston. NSK makes IT work. And by McHugh Well Drilling in Pembroke, Massachusetts, serving individual and business well, pump, and test boring needs since 1952. And now, we present your host, Mr. Robert Kopper.
Hi, this is Robert Kopper, and this is the Robert Kopper Show. We have the pleasure of interviewing and speaking with Rob Roy, who was a pilot during the Second World War of a torpedo bomber. And he's got a lot of fascinating stories and experience to tell us about. So without further ado, this is Rob Roy.
Okay. So this is what I looked like back when I was 18 or 19. This is when I was studying at Pensacola, Florida. And then if I was a good boy and finished the course, I ended up being called an ensign. Some of them called us ensigns. And after that, they sent me to a town called Fort Lauderdale to learn to fly these torpedo bombers made by Grumman. We called that town Fort Lickerdale, I guess because they hadn't let us drink all the time we were at Pensacola, and now we could do anything we wanted, so we changed the town name to Fort Lickerdale. And following that, they sent us to join a squadron in San Diego, California, called Torpedo Squadron 84. And my first day there, they said, Roy, take a plane and fly around the area for 3 hours and familiarize yourself. You've never flown around here. So I went off, and when I came back, a sailor said, the skipper wants to talk to you, Mr. Roy. And our skipper was an Annapolis graduate. We called them ring knockers because they liked to call attention by whacking their Annapolis ring. So he is holding a telegram, and he said, Roy, you should know better than this. Let me read you this wire. At 1400 hours, torpedo bomber J-69 buzzed the racetrack at Tijuana, Mexico. The pilot did not attempt acrobatics, but did cause considerable confusion by drowning out the public address system. I didn't even know I was in Mexico. There were no dotted lines the way there are in the books. But it turned out that flight saved my life.
How did that?
And the reason, because soon after that, all the skippers on the West Coast got orders to send their 3 finest naval aviators out to Pearl Harbor to form a new night torpedo squadron. So 2 other guys and myself are on our way out to Pearl with 3 guys from the next nearby squadron. And we start comparing notes, and I got terribly frightened because I realized, although they were supposed to send their 3 finest, all of these skippers said, good chance to clean the deadwood out of the squadron. The 3 from my squadron were a guy who told the skipper he ran the squadron like a high school teacher, another guy that came in late and drunk every morning, and Roy, who was the racetrack in Mexico, and these other 3 guys had the same kinds of stories. So I said to myself, what kind of an outfit is this going to be? We're all cast-offs, and there's going to be many more from all if we all are cast-offs. But it turned out, had I had my wish to stay with the squadron in San Diego, I would have gone out on the Bunker Hill, and I would have been killed sinking a Japanese battleship, the Yamato, or the ones that didn't get killed sinking the battleship were sitting in the ready room one day when a kamikaze, that's a Jap suicide bomber, landed by a fluke right in the ready room. So there were no survivors from that squadron. And this thing that I thought was going to be sure death, I managed to survive.
So you escaped all that fate by misbehaving with that plane and buzzing the racetrack.
So that taught me a valuable lesson.
Yeah.
Don't be good. This is what the plane looked like with its wings folded on the flight deck. These 2 poor souls were condemned to fly in the back of my dump truck.
So it was a three-man crew?
3-man crew, yeah.
And it was
normally it's a turret gunner,
Mm-hmm.
a radio man, and the pilot. we took the turret out because we were going to fly at night, and they figured they wouldn't have anything to shoot at, and it weighed 2,000 pounds, so they put in radar gear and gave us a radar man instead of a gunner. So I had a radar man and a radio man.
You referred to it as a flying dump truck. It wasn't a very
Well,
fast
it didn't
plane.
fly very fast. It carried a huge load. We could carry a 2,000-pound torpedo. We could carry 1,200-pound bombs inside.
Oh yeah. Mhm.
We had machine guns in the wing that we could fire from the cockpit. We could fire rockets that were suspended in the wing. So it carried an awful lot of different things, and it was very slow, so we called it a dump truck. One thing that was very strange, but I got used to it, is if you could write home to your mother, or if she could write to you, you'd find out the letters would go. This one went to 16 different outfits.
Wow.
The mail was pretty weird in World War II.
Could be
Somebody
anywhere.
would look and there'd be 20 Robert Roys, so they'd send it to this squadron. Oh, that's the wrong one, so they'll send it to that one. By the time it finally got to you, it had been at 40 different places.
Wow.
The other funny thing is, I think the boys like to tease me because I was the youngest, and this is a photograph that was taken as we were heading off to Tokyo. That's a city in Japan, and we were to bomb them. Unfortunately, I am this guy because,
The farthest plane away.
well, in an echelon, if they make a turn, it's easy, but the first guy it gets progressively tough. The last guy is pulling his throttle all the way off and on, and if they'd waited one more second, I'd have been perfectly lined up. But my son said, don't worry about it. He's an engineer, graduated from Worcester Polytech. And he analyzed this flight, and he showed me that my plane and the skipper's were in perfect alignment. Everybody else was misaligned. that made And the other exciting thing about flying at night, this was the dashboard of our, and we weren't to show any lights, because, so it was pretty hard to keep
So you
track of
could
all
read
the
those
lights.
instruments without any lights.
So I learned to close my eyes and hope that God will spare me. Here's the cover of Newsweek magazine in February 1944, showing again the Grumman Avenger.
That was the name of the.
The name of the plane was the Avenger.
That's quite a photograph there.
Grumman made it, and then because there was such a demand, General Motors set up a company called Eastern Aircraft, and they started manufacturing these. The official nomenclature was TBF, torpedo bomber. F by a fluke was Grumman's name. So we had two different planes. We flew TBFs or TBMs, and the M was the one made by General Motors. Most of them, the ones we flew were TBMs. I slept right where this, we got hit by a kamikaze. These guys were crazy. They would put these Japanese guys in an airplane. They must have gotten them drunk and hang a big bomb on it and then tell them to go out and find the biggest piece of steel they could find and ram themselves right into it. We got hit about 6 times.
And that was your bunk, right where
The time I remember was this one,
Yeah.
because here's the, this is the elevator that takes planes up and down from the hangar deck. It is here about 300 feet above the ship. That's most of the elevator. And I'm trying to sleep in the room next door. This was 6 a.m., can you believe? We used to, in our drinking sessions, we'd say, what would we do if they told us to take a bomb and fly ourselves into an enemy ship?
So what was your first assignment? First time out?
Oh, a practice run.
Yeah. And
We had-
then when you started to
We
see
were in
action.
a convoy of 5 groups all sailing together, and each group had about 20 ships. They would have 5 carriers, 4 or 5 cruisers, and a bunch of destroyers, and so there were plenty of practice targets. Flying at night, they found different things for us to do. For example, one night they told me to take a plane and fly to a funny little village in Kyushu, one of the main Japanese islands, and I was to find it and then harass it for 2 or 3 hours by making individual attacks and dropping one bomb at a time until the next guy coming along 3 hours later would replace me. And they gave me a medal for doing that. But we didn't see ships at night, so
Now, could you describe what that medal is?
that is the Distinguished Flying Cross.
I see. Given to you by the Secretary of the Navy.
James Forrestal, yes,
Forrestal, yeah.
it says for heroism and extraordinary achievement in aerial flight as the pilot of a torpedo bomber in Night Torpedo Squadron 90 attached to the USS Enterprise in action against enemy Japanese forces at Kyushu, Japan on the night of May 12, 1945. Carrying out a long-range mission alone and without fighter cover, Lieutenant Junior Grade, then Ensign Roy, pressed home repeated attacks on a strongly defended hostile airfield for over 2 hours, starting one large fire, numerous small fires, and inflicting extensive damage on enemy ground installations. His skill and courage were in keeping with the highest tradition of the United States Naval Service.
So they were heavily defended by what, machine guns, or what were they using in those days to?
On the ground?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Machine guns.
mostly.
Did you get hit at all?
Oh, yeah, that was another interesting thing. After World War II, we elected a President George Bush, not the sap you remember, but his father was president before him. And while he was president, he was quoted as saying, "I was the youngest Navy pilot in World War II." So I started researching, and he was born 3 days after I was. And I said, well, that's baloney. They were cranking out hundreds of Navy pilots a month. The war went on. And sure enough, I never heard that again from Washington. We flew the same plane, the Grumman Avenger, and by the fluke of all flukes, we both got hit over the same island. There was an island between Iwo Jima and the main Japanese islands called Chichi-jima. And they sent us up there every night, all night long, to keep them from turning on lights and repairing the damage. All day long, we'd plaster it with hundreds of planes. But George, flying his TBF on one of those attacks, got hit and had to land in the water, and he got picked up by a destroyer. I got back to the carrier and was in the ready room when my crewman came. "Mr. Roy, come with us." And he took me down the hangar deck and showed me the plane we'd just been flying. It was a great big hole through the tail that I didn't even know. Yeah. I guess that's why they pick young kids to fly. They think they don't know any better. Yeah. So that.
So you did get hit, but you survived that. That's
Yeah.
another near miss. Wow. Did you have any reaction with George Bush?
No, he was in another squadron.
Another squadron altogether. Yeah. Flying the same kinds of missions in the same plane.
Yeah, he was in a daytime squadron, so he did attack ships.
Yeah.
He did the opposite things to the things we did.
Yeah. Now, what are these dates of missions?
This I was through. I wasn't sure what kind of questions you were asking, so I made a list of all of the carriers I've landed on, which consists of 6, and how many landings. But we were to go out into Lake Michigan to learn to land. They bought 2 old lake steamers and they cut all the superstructure off and put a flat deck on. And every morning they'd leave from just south of Chicago. They'd go out into Lake Michigan, and then these wee saps would come. The day I was scheduled, there wasn't enough wind to land this, so they had us go out in trainer planes, SNJs. And so we made our 12 landings.
On what used to be lake steamers with
Yeah.
Plywood decks or something.
Then in November of that year, off Pearl Harbor, we qualified for night landings on the Saratoga, another famous carrier. And then on Christmas Eve, they sent us to war on the USS Enterprise, sailing out of, well, they made 12 landings in Lake Michigan, 12 on the Saratoga, 39 on the Enterprise, 14 of which were night landings, so I didn't have to worry as much as I thought. And later, I made a landing on the Bennington and the Essex and the Bunker Hill.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about some other missions you flew.
Well, we had radar, it was new then,
Mhm.
and we had a radar man in back, and they had us go and do radar reconnaissance flights, and I guess things look different from radar than visual. But, we did a lot of, we did looking for ships, they sent us out, and it was night or day, they'd show up on the radar. But by the time we were out, most of the Japanese ships were sunk. And this was also given to me by Secretary Forrestal. This was for meritorious achievement in aerial flight as pilot of a torpedo bomber in Night Torpedo Squadron 90, attached to the USS Enterprise. Facing hostile anti-aircraft fire and under adverse weather conditions, Lieutenant Junior Grade, then Ensign Roy, pressed home attacks against the Bonin Islands, executed search missions in the South China Sea and along the China coast. That was a long way from home.
Yeah.
We figured out that if we wanted to quit then, we could go either way and we'd be halfway from the real world.
Where were you during Pearl Harbor?
I was in high school in Northfield, Massachusetts,
Yeah.
Mount Herman School for Boys. In fact, I realize now the reason I volunteered for this is they sent a Navy pilot with wings and medals out to talk to us and tell us what fun it was
The recruit.
doing this
Yeah.
after the war started. So I went and signed up, but I had to go get my mother's permission, and that wasn't easy. But I realize now that was pretty shrewd of the Navy
Oh,
to
yeah.
send these guys out,
Yeah.
because I don't know how many others signed up, but
How old were you when you signed up?
18. You have to be 18
Yeah.
then. You had to be 18 to win. They were desperate then, so
Oh,
they
sure.
would take you
Yeah.
at age 18.
Absolutely.
While I was in college, I found out you could get down to Squantum, Massachusetts, which in those days was a naval air station. They would fly Sundays in the reserve, and they paid you, I don't know, $100 a month or a lot of money. So that I loved that when I was in college. Unfortunately, when the Korean War started, they said, "Hey, you guys," and they hauled us back in. So I went in the Korean War. I got called in for 2 more years. But as
Flying
luck
same
would
kind of
have it,
plane?
I got sent to Quonset Point, Rhode Island, which was a naval air station then, and spent the 2 years there. So I didn't get shot at, so that was nice.
So when you went to out of Squantum, were you flying the same?
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
Yeah.
They took these wrecks out of where they'd been sitting aside for 50 years, and we had all kinds of failures of old, tired parts.
Yeah,
sitting
yeah.
there. Yeah, that was kind of a disaster.
Must have been kind of sketchy flying an older plane like that that had already seen service.
Apparently, they stuck them in a barn somewhere, and
Yeah.
when the Korean War started, they
Pulled them out again.
pulled them out and said, "Okay, you guys."
Did you go overseas? You didn't go overseas at that time though?
No.
No, just around.
Well,
Yeah.
they sent us to Norfolk, Virginia, to get updated on radar.
Well, I'm just going to ask you a general question of what home life was like. Just before you signed up, but there after the recruiter came to Northfield, Mount Herman, what was your home life like? I mean, in terms
Well, I
of
didn't have much home life. When I signed up, I was at the prep school out in Northfield, living out there. And when the war started, I signed up for the summer term at college rather than wait till September. I started the minute I got out of high school.
What college was that?
Go to Harvard. And I lived at Dunster House on the river, so I don't really know much about home life then. 'Cause I was either in that school or that school. And
How many brothers and sisters in your family?
I have two sisters, and I lived. We were born down in Pennsylvania, and my father died of cancer of the liver or something when I was 5, and we moved back to Wollaston to live with my mother's parents. And we lived with them for as long as I can remember, which had to be tough on them, taking in 3 wild kids and a daughter they thought they had dumped. So
Did you go to all 4 years at Harvard?
yes, well I did 6 months before I went into the Navy, and then they gave me credit, which I welcomed, for the intensive ground school studies we had in the Navy. So when I came back, I only had this, I think it was 2 years, and I got a BA.
So you went into the Navy and then served your time, but then you came back to finish school at Harvard?
Yes.
Yeah.
When we first were taken into the Navy, rather than send us to Pensacola right off the bat, they farmed us out, and there's 130 of us being sent down to Texas. And there were half a dozen of us ended up in a little town called Kilgore. And that was scary as hell, because as you can see, there were oil derricks everywhere.
Yeah.
That's where they taught us to fly.
You had to fly around those.
But if you ever had to make a forced landing, you were sure death.
Yeah.
I've never seen so many oil derricks. They
Look at 'em all.
everywhere
Yeah.
you turn. Patricia grew up in Wollaston, and at one stage, a friend of mine from Harvard was a neighbor of hers. And we played bridge many nights, and next thing I know, I'm proposing marriage to Patricia. So whatever his plan was, I guess it worked.
Yeah. Cupid.
So unfortunately, after 60 years of marriage, she passed on 4 years ago. So. Of our squadron, these are pilots that did not survive.
Oh.
So, so whenever I think of, am I lucky, I look at that and say, yes, very.
None of these folks survived on the top row.
Yeah, they're all pilots in our squadron that did not make it.
Which one are you? Could you point to it again?
I'm the second head in from the left margin in the back row. All the ensigns were kept
In the back.
The scariest one, this one that I got the medal for, they said, Roy, you're to fly 300 miles and spend 2-3 hours over this target and keep attacking them until somebody comes to relieve you. And then you can come back to the ship. Oh, and we won't be here when you get back. We'll be 100 miles that way.
Not an easy task for sure.
Scary. If they asked me to do that now, I'd say, are you crazy? Are you out of your mind?
Yeah.
Nobody would do that.
I wouldn't try it, even in my youth.
That's why they took 18-year-old kids.
Yeah.
They go, hey, this is
Try
fine.
anything. Yeah.
Hey, whoopee. I ran home to my mother. I'm having a great time, Mommy.
Well, it was great fun and very interesting to talk to you, Rob. Really
Sorry,
appreciate
it
it.
was probably pretty boring, but they were good
Not at
sport
all.
and they had some business.
Not at all. So again, thank you very much, and thank you for watching. Good night.